listening to the Labor Notes podcast, the weekly show from Labor Notes on rank-and-file news and organizing tactics. I'm pod co-host Danielle Smith, organizer at Labor Notes.
And I'm pod co-host Natasha Elena Yulman, a staff writer at Labor Notes.
We're talking today about union reform organizing and reform caucuses, something our readers and the workers who organize with us might know as core to the Labor Notes project. It's part of a theme that runs through our coverage, organizing, our gatherings, and recurring workshops, which is, what do we do when the union isn't working like it should for its members or truly representing our needs? The Labor Notes staff has now put together a new guide called the Caucus Organizing Packet. It lays out basic concepts and definitions around reform caucuses and organizing, and takes you through the resources that our staff has developed over decades of work on this topic. We intend for this resource to be a living document that will update over time. Whether you're new to the idea of reforming your union or just starting to think about the possibilities, or you've already built up your caucus infrastructure and campaigned for union office, you'll find something in this guide that can speak to the technical and maybe even existential questions you might be encountering on this path. This is part one of a two-part series on the new Labor Notes Caucus Organizing Packet, which you can find on labornotes.org/caucus. That's CAUCUS. Today, we'll cover the basics of reform caucuses, plus what's in this packet, who it's for, and how you could use it. In part two next week, we'll get more in depth on some questions caucus members often run into.
We've got our coworkers Lisa Hsu and Barbara Mataloni on with us today to talk us through this guide, answer some of your burning questions about union reform and union democracy, and talk about how reform caucuses might fit in. Labor Notes pod enthusiasts will remember when Lisa joined us in the past to talk about grocery workers organizing at the United Food and Commercial Workers International Union, or UFCW, where some reform currents are gathering momentum, and when Barbara talked to us about how to organize right now in a moment of unprecedented attacks on working people. Lisa has also written about and organized with film and TV production workers at the International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees, or IATSE. Back in 2023, IATSE members formed a reform caucus called the Caucus of Rank-and-File Entertainment Workers, or CREW. Her piece at the time covering CREW's launch highlighted many of the common conditions that lead to rank-and-file members deciding to take the reins.
Barbara, who I work with in covering and organizing with K-12 educators, was the president of the Massachusetts Teachers Association before this, after running an underdog campaign as a rank-and-file candidate out of the educators for a Democratic Union caucus. In 4 years as president, she dealt with a pretty intense climate of political attacks on public education, including the targeting of teachers by trying to use dubious student test score metrics to evaluate educators. And I think the way she and others organized around these issues, communicating information to members, bringing them together to work together, opening up possibilities for effective direct action, will be really useful to think about for anyone in a union that feels like it's languishing. Lisa and Barbara, thank you both for being here.
Thank you. It's great to be back.
Glad to be here.
Before we get into the caucus organizing packet that you two, Danielle, and others on our staff and networks have helped to build, maybe let's start with the basics. What is a reform caucus and what isn't a reform caucus? I think any of you could take this one.
I'll go ahead and start. On the most basic level, it's a group of union members coming together under a vision for a different kind of union. The goal is union transformation. And in Labor Notes, that means more democratic, led by the rank and file, and more willing to take on fights with the boss. While some unions have issues or identity-based caucuses, that isn't what we mean when we say caucus. A reform caucus will organize around an issue to involve members in a different way to be a union, but they're not about single issues. They're asking and answering the question, what kind of union do you want to be? Most union members haven't really been given the choice to think about what kind of union they want. The caucus answers that question through action by showing members what a democratic fighting union looks like.
I love that definition. I think what I'll add is, we call the packet a reform caucus organizing packet, but not all reformers necessarily call their organization a caucus. Some are kind of more informally organized. We might think of them as reform currents. Some might style themselves as a network or some other kind of organization. But at the end of the day, the key thing is that they're organizing around union transformation. So the packet is meant to be helpful to activists across all these different kinds of groups.
I also have a basic question for you both. We've already heard some references so far to reform efforts animating the movement. As Natasha mentioned, Lisa's written about reform-minded members at the UFCW and at IATSE. We heard a bit about Barbara's tenure at the MTA. Again, that's the Massachusetts Teachers Association, part of a reform thread in a number of public educator unions. So my question is, when is forming a reform caucus the right move, as opposed to trying something else? Who should do it?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the question is, what is the something else? So I think some listeners of the podcast may know of Ellen David Friedman, who's a member of our board, and who has also made many contributions to the caucus organizing packet. She has a classic Labor Notes article called What to Do When Your Union Leaders Break Your Heart, and we have a workshop based on that as well. So in her article, she talks about how the first step is, regardless of whether you do end up forming a reform caucus, is to start talking to your coworkers and then talk directly to union leadership together about improvements that can be made. She says, be strategic, don't be angry, stay steady, persevere. So some people listening to this podcast might have already tried that and it hasn't worked. And then at that point, you should start thinking about laying the groundwork for more sustained reform organizing, and start building up that base and potentially forming a reform caucus or some kind of reform organization. In terms of who should do it and how, in the packet, we have a few sections that speak to this. One called Principles of Caucus Organizing to keep in mind, another called Getting Started. So it's these are questions of organizing. You know, do you have a representative organizing committee? Are you committed to getting there? Do you have clearly defined goals and priorities that you can agree on? Are you thinking like an organizer? That is, are you thinking about how to bring members in and how to organize around deeply and widely felt issues in your union? And if you're not thinking in this way, then, you know, maybe you shouldn't be thinking about starting a reform caucus. But that's the advice we have in the packet.
Thanks, Lisa. That's a great jumping off point. So then, really tangibly, what does it look like to start building a reform or caucus group?
It looks like a group of union members, could be 3 or 4 when you get started, getting together to say, are there other ways to solve our workplace problems? What would that look like? Sometimes people do a bit of reading, say Secrets of a Successful Organizer to get the basics of organizing. But mostly, like all organizing, like Lisa said, it means talking and listening, finding out what members care about, and creating spaces to resolve those problems democratically. If you look at our principles, one of the first things we say is that caucuses do. And in doing, they bring in more members who are excited about an active union. So EDU did a few things when it was getting started. It organized members to speak at a board meeting after the board had voted to connect teacher evaluations to student test scores in contradiction to what the membership had previously voted. We held a gathering and invited caucus members from Chicago and other active unions to share how they built their power. We brought members together across the state to name their issues and begin to imagine a new kind of union. Eventually, we ran for office.
That book Barbara just mentioned, Secrets of a Successful Organizer, is one of our bestsellers and an essential organizing primer. You can find it on our website at labornotes.org/store. We also hold trainings of the same name every 3 months and at our in-person troublemaker schools. And we'll actually be doing a 3-part podcast series on our secrets trainings in April, so be sure to look out for those next month. So I think everyone who's been involved with reform work knows that it's not easy. And I wanted to ask you guys about some of the common challenges or the kind of pushback members often run into when they're thinking about starting a caucus or reform effort.
Great question. There has never been a caucus formation that was not called divisive. It's simply amazing the consistency with which elected leadership labels the democratic engagement of members raising questions, bringing workers into action, asking for transparency as a problem, as divisive. And the real challenge is to not let that labeling undermine your caucus work, to stay steady and focused and confident that bringing democratic practices and transparency and a fight to the boss spirit to the work is exactly what the union needs. Caucus members will bend over backwards to not offend and still be called divisive. So stay steady and don't be distracted by how they label you. Do good work. People will come to it.
So we've now got resources on all this and a lot more in our new guide that we talked about earlier called the Caucus Organizing Packet. It covers basic definitions on Reform Caucus terminology and explains fundamental concepts on how to organize from below. There are also tons of links to resources on everything from basic principles to recordings and slides from some of our workshops on the topic, links to examples of successful reform organizing efforts by Teamsters for a Democratic Union, EDU, and many others. Lisa and Barbara, could you take us through what's in this packet and how you think people can use it?
Sure. So yeah, we've already mentioned a few of these sections, and I think reformers at various stages of organizing with different degrees of experience should all find something useful in it. So the introduction to the packet is a pretty good overview of what a reform caucus is and isn't. So I would suggest everyone also check out the section Principles of Caucus Organizing, which I think has a lot of wisdom in it. And then depending on what stage you're at in your reform organizing, topics in the packet include getting started, expanding your reach to bring in more members, how to organize contract campaigns or issue campaigns from below, member education, running for union office, and what to do once you've won leadership. There are also sections on your democratic rights as a union reformer, how to approach union conventions, and fundraising as a reform caucus.
We also have links to articles and videos that tell the story of how other caucuses have done this work. As Lisa said, it's a living document. So build your caucus and then share your knowledge with us. Also, read the content together and talk through the lessons and ideas. There's a lot in there that'll become more meaningful as you do the work.
Thank you both so much. Again, you can find the Caucus Organizing Packet on labornotes.org/caucus. And keep an eye out for part 2 of this series, where we'll dig even deeper into caucus and reform organizing.
Please rate us or leave us a review on Apple or Spotify. If you're listening to us on Podbean at labornotespodcast.podbean.com, download our episode.
We have some great online events coming up, including our next stewards training on the topic of dealing with difficult supervisors on April 13th, and our next Winning a Strong Contract series on April 14th and 21st. You can sign up for those on labornotes.org/events. Folks in the Bay Area can also check out the launch for Labor Notes board member Ellen David Friedman's new book, Keep Going, A Guide to Organizing When It's Hard. This free event is on March 28th at the Bay Area Longshore Memorial Association, and it's a great way to quickly get your hands on this excellent organizing guide, which will be on sale at the event. You can RSVP at tinyurl.com/keepgoingbooktalk.
The Labor Notes podcast is produced by Danielle Smith, Sindhu Sundar, and myself. Our title music was written and performed by our coworker Keith Brower Brown. See you next week. Solidarity, y'all.